Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a lot of big news. It is a Friday, so we're going to do our best to cover as much of the upcoming weekend stuff as we can, as well as going over the NBA Finals, which is finally set. The Dallas Mavericks take care of business in Game 5 against the Minnesota Timberwolves on the road. They won all 3 games on the road in this series, something that I know I did not think they could do, so that was they blew them out too, and we'll talk about that game a little bit in the first segment here. In the second segment, we're gonna do a preview of the finals. We finally know what it's gonna be: the Mavs or the Celtics. Which one of those duos, those star-studded duos, will take home their first championship as a group? Who will emerge victorious? We'll go over that in the second segment. In the third segment, we'll take a look more at the Timberwolves and where they go from here. Their team gets a little bit expensive, and while they have a nice rising star in Anthony Edwards, some of the other contracts on there might be a little much, and we will take a look at exactly where they sit after making a deep run in the postseason. We'll then transition into hockey, talk about the Panthers taking Game 5, crucial Game 5, in the Garden to go up 3-2. We'll talk about that game and the Game 5 coming up tonight between the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers. And then we will close out our show with Friday MLB Power Rankings. It has been about 2 weeks since we last did our Power Rankings. They were done on May 15th, so it's been a little more than 2 weeks, so we'll go over what's changed in our power rankings and everything like that. But before we get into our first segment today, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation, with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world of sports to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you for tuning in and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show today talking about the Dallas Mavericks just destroying the Minnesota Timberwolves. This game, if you just looked at its final score, 124-103, you would say, oh, I guess they got destroyed, but it wasn't like that bad. 20 points, maybe there was a run at the end. It was awful. 20 points makes it look like it was closer than it was, and that's saying something, especially for a series where every single game before this one had been decided by less than 10 points, and all but one of those games had been decided by one possession. So you had 3 out of 5 games in this series get decided by one possession, and the one that sends this series out, what was really a super exciting series to watch in every single game, is this dud of a game where Luka comes out strong and he scores 20 points in the first quarter. He could not miss, and that's really what it comes down to in this game. Luka and Kyrie both could not miss. And for a Timberwolves defense that was probably the best in basketball, they did not have their best game. Really the entire Wolves team, they didn't come out with enough energy. It felt like they came out flat. It felt like they kind of realized the series was over. They had just come off a super hard-fought series against the Nuggets, and you have to think if that is something that affected them a little bit. I was going through it. I know we talked in the beginning when we were first previewing this series that the Timberwolves had won the season series, but I was looking at it, and they had not played a single game against the Mavericks where both Luka and Kyrie played. So that is something else entirely. It's something that the Timberwolves hadn't seen with both of them on the court at the same time. So, taking a look at what this series meant overall, we saw Luka Doncic really assert himself as de facto number one number. You can make an argument that he's the best player in the world right now, like a lot of people are. I think that's recency bias. I think that title still goes to Jokic, but it really established him as number two in the NBA. At least he is incredible. Everyone, it shines as ridiculous as it might sound to say. He was a little bit underrated beforehand. There wasn't the national spotlight on him of, oh, he is just unstoppable, which he is, and now he's finally getting that recognition for the Timberwolves in this game. Cat had a good game, which when we were talking about this game heading into it, that was, the big question. Hey, is Cat going to be able to have a good game? And he did. He had himself a very solid game, and so did Anthony Edwards. They both were pretty solid, pretty okay efficiency as well. Karl Anthony Towns puts up 20 shots, but 28 points. Anthony Edwards also with 28. They're relatively efficient 28 points for both of them. But it just wasn't enough on a night where Luka was just getting whatever he wanted. Him and Kyrie Irving combined for 72 points. 72 points on their own. That is not a recipe for success if you have two players combining for 72 points. And at some point you just kind of have to realize there's nothing you can do. And I feel like that happened after the first quarter. They saw Luka wasn't missing it, and really another thing, in the middle of that third quarter, they went a stretch of, I believe, 4 or 5 minutes where they didn't score a single basket. And there were stretches where, especially in that second half, where, the Mavs started to struggle a little bit on offense, but the Wolves were never able, and they weren't super long stretches, but it didn't matter how long or short those stretches were, the Wolves were never able to put together runs that, led to bigger scoring, an ability to come back, even when they were struggling a little bit down the stretch, which, a team that shoots 54% from the field as much as they can struggle, I guess. Minnesota was never able to apply that real comeback pressure. We saw them get into a similar situation in Game 7, and they were able to lock in and get efficient on offense against the defending champions in the Nuggets. But they couldn't have it. It seemed like they were just out of gas after that first quarter, and it's a shame. It's a disappointing way to go out in one of the most successful seasons in Timberwolves history. You have to. We're going to do a deeper dive into where the Timberwolves go from here. But looking at this season before we get into that, it's the first time they won a series since the Kevin Garnett era, which was 20 years ago. This was a very successful season for the Timberwolves overall, and we'll see if this is something that they can keep up into the future. But Mavericks destroy them, and it was not close at all. Yeah, and the big thing, the big thing is just the shooting. It really is, especially from your stars. We can talk all day about, the presence of Luka and the lack of defensive intensity from the Wolves, but it really is just the shooting. They were able to make all their shots. I believe Kyrie and Luka's true shooting percentage was around 60%, and it kind of just took all the wins out of the sails for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they weren't able to get that kind of belief, that swagger back in and get them going again. So overall, it was a fun series. It might have been a short series, but it was a series that came down to the wire in just about every single game. So very cool to see, again, both young teams. Mavericks moving on. We'll talk about what their chances are against a super team in the Celtics coming up in our next segment here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. But yeah, stick around for that. We will be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Everybody in the world. Give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around, I feel like everybody is the fakest. I make it every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up in the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I'm in this shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. I'm hitting my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced, I'll get my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the music fits, I'm losing shit, it's stupid if you choose to live, but choose to dip, you choose to fight, or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh! Losing my mind. Everybody in the world.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down the Dallas Mavericks absolutely decimating the Minnesota Timberwolves in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals in order to advance to the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. We will be breaking down that series here in just 1 second for you, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I appreciate everything you guys do give. I will get to those questions as soon as I possibly can. And I appreciate you guys sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we have our NBA Finals matchup set. And it's not going to start until June 6th. But we have the Dallas Mavericks making their first finals appearance since they beat the Heat back in, I believe that was 2012? Not sure about that. But they're first in quite a while, first in this era. The Celtics making their second their second finals appearance in 3 years. So we have a different level of kind of experience in here. Now, you can look at it that way as a team, but while the Celtics have more team experience, the Mavericks have Kyrie Irving, who's won it with LeBron, been there a whole bunch. They might have more personal experience. And now that's not to say that no one on the Celtics has championships experience. You know, Drew Holiday won one just a couple years ago in Milwaukee. This is going to be a fun matchup. We're looking not just offensively at this matchup, but we are looking at defensively. These have been the two best defenses in the NBA in the back quarter of the season. The Mavericks number 2 and the Celtics number 1. We saw that kind of come to life. Then I know the Celtics, we talked about it, they haven't had the toughest path, and I feel like we haven't really seen them go all out yet, but they haven't needed to go all out because they've been great, and they are a little banged up. They do have Kristaps Porzingis still injured. He hasn't come back yet. I'd be shocked if he wasn't ready by June 6th, because all reports were there was a good chance he could play in the conference finals if they needed him to. They ended up sweeping that, and it ended up not being that big of a deal. But adding Kristaps Porzingis back down low, going up against Lively and and the Mavericks guys down low in Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. You know, the way they were able to terrorize Rudy Gobert down low. Kristaps Porzingis is a little more athletic, a little more agile, might be able to deal with that a little better. Now, the reason the Celtics defense has been so big is because of their perimeter defense, and I thought we might see some of that kind of pop up in the Timberwolves series when we were talking about the Mavs playing against Jaden McDaniels, but that just didn't really seem to bother Luka or Kyrie. They both had insane series. Kyrie got called out. Really, the entirety of the Dallas team got called out. There was a shirt that Anthony Edwards wore in Game 6 against the Nuggets saying, "Hey, we want Dallas," and they ended up getting Dallas, and this is what happened. So, taking a look at this series, the season series, the Celtics won. It was very high scoring. Both of these teams, like we've seen the Celtics be able to go up against the high flying offense of the Pacers, play defense and shut down, especially in the big moments. If you remember back to that sweep, they weren't winning those games convincingly. The Pacers offense was doing their job. It was the clutch defense down the stretch, and some of it was Pacer mistakes, but a lot of it was Celtics getting a steal down the stretch in in the last two games. In Game 3 and 4, they had steals that kind of put the game away. But taking a look at this series between the Mavs and the Celtics, you have a battle of duos. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown versus Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. And we talked about Kyrie's experience, and I think that's kind of invaluable here. It's not to say that the Celtics don't have plenty of playoff experience going to like 5 straight Eastern Conference finals. They have plenty of playoff experience, but they don't have as much finals experience. That team defense from the Boston Celtics is going to be tough, but the Mavericks are coming off of a series where they just played against the best defense in the league, and it didn't really seem to bother them all that much. So all in all, I'm not too worried. Really what this comes down to, and I think this is going to be a really competitive series, I think the Celtics might start a little slow, just because, like the Nuggets, they in the beginning of the Timberwolves series, they hadn't really had to go all out yet. And I still feel like the Celtics haven't gotten to that higher gear, and they've been phenomenal these playoffs. They just felt like they haven't needed to go to that higher gear. I think the Mavericks might start a little hot, because they are the hottest team in basketball right now. Even coming into the playoffs, they were one of the hottest teams in basketball. Luka and Kyrie, I believe, can take the first game or two. The first game, I know it is in Boston, but they just showed in Minnesota they're able to. The road factor doesn't matter too much to them, especially in a great crowd, a great arena crowd like Minnesota. Now, Boston is a completely different animal. Everybody knows that. Boston is a completely different animal, especially in the postseason. But I think they have the chops to go ahead and take. They can probably take game 1. I think this goes 6 or 7. I'm taking the Mavericks simply because they have the best player left in the playoffs. And if we're going to break this down position by position, I think this series goes 7 pretty easy, and playing a game 7 in Boston is not going to be fun for the Mavericks. But I think the Mavericks are going to be able to pull this out. Luka is just playing on a different level than everybody else in this postseason so far. And this isn't any slander on the Celtics, because the Celtics, I believe, as a team, have the best built team. Team defense, team offense. There was a reason they were ranked number 1 in the league. There's a reason they were head and shoulders above everybody else in the East. And there's a reason that if they didn't make it this far, it would be considered a disappointing season. This was the bare minimum season for the Celtics, and that is kind of crazy to say with the way that it played out. They were just so much better than everybody else in the East. The Mavericks had to go through a bit of a slugfest. Even in that last series where they kind of made it look a little easy, it definitely was not easy. They had to scratch and claw their way, hit a couple buzzer beaters, hold off some late game attacks from the Timberwolves to win that series in 5. So they've been a little more battle tested, but they've been able to come out on top in every series. They haven't taken any of them to 7. Their series have gone 6, 6, and 5. So they've played just one more game, or just I guess 2 more games, 3 more games, whatever, just a couple more games than the Boston Celtics so far this playoffs. But we will have to see exactly how that goes. Eric says he definitely agrees. He has the Mavericks in 6 because they went through the Pacers. All 4 games were close, and Halliburton play in 2 of swept. Yeah, uh, and and Kelsey says Celtics in 6. So we got a couple different opinions there in chat. It's definitely gonna be a tight series, and I could definitely see this going either way. The fact that it isn't starting till June 6th, I think, is a benefit for both teams, especially more for the Mavs, who, while the Celtics have to get healthier, right? The Mavericks, they've played a lot of intense basketball recently. Getting your guys rested up, that those extra couple days of rest are going to be huge. And I know a week without basketball kind of sucks for the fans and maybe even for the marketing of the NBA. But you have your schedule set. You can't really change that. Concerts and whatever else arenas are being used for around the league. But it is definitely something to keep an eye on how rest is going to affect them, and then they were all going to get a bunch of rest. But overall, I am taking the Mavericks in 7 games. We heard from Eric and Kelsey, but if anybody else in the chat would like to share their opinion, I'd love to see that. In our next segment, we're going to focus more on the Timberwolves. We're going to talk about where their future is from here, what kind of future outlook they might have after making a deep run in the playoffs, really their first deep run in forever, their first playoff series win in 20 years. So stick around for that. We will be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just did a finals prediction for the NBA Finals between the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics. I had the Mavericks taking it in 7. We'll do a deeper dive into that series just a couple days before it kicks off, about a week from now. So maybe next Friday, we'll do another deep dive into that series. In our first segment, we also talked about the Game 5 that sent the Mavericks to the NBA Finals to take on the Celtics. They absolutely destroyed the Minnesota Timberwolves. In this segment, we are going to talk about those same Minnesota Timberwolves, finish off our NBA coverage for the day. We're going to talk about the Timberwolves, where they go from here, if they can repeat this success in future seasons, and what really a future outlook map for them kind of looks like. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and leave it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you for sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our NBA coverage today talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, their path to where they got, and what their future looks like. So breaking down how they got here, obviously they trade for Rudy Gobert a season or 2 ago. Kind of looks like an awful trade after everything goes down the dumps last season. They rebound this season, look more like the team we expect them to. Anthony Edwards obviously has his coming out party in the playoffs, takes them all the way to the Western Conference Finals. I talked about in previews before how this is the first time they won a playoff series since the Kevin Garnett era, nearly 20 years ago. It's been a very long time since Minnesota basketball was this successful. And it seems like this is a team. It's a very young team. They've had a lot of people still locked up, still under contract that can continue going forward and being successful. But their one hitch in that is that they get expensive next season. And I know this is a little less exciting, but Anthony Edwards' extension kicks in. His all-pro selection, he gets that bonus. Jaden McDaniels' extension kicks in. You have that Rudy Gobert contract, which is expiring soon. And then you have some important pieces like Mike Conley, who is a free agent. Some of these guys are going to need to get paid. Naz Reid won Sixth Man of the Year. His contract isn't up, but it will be up soon. That's another thing that they need to keep an eye out on. The Timberwolves, while they are still an incredibly young team with with a great outlook for the future, if you take a look at them compared to the Mavericks or the Celtics or the Pacers, the other three teams in the conference finals this season, I don't feel as confident in their ability to get back here as the rest of them. The Pacers you might call into question, but for the two teams in the finals, right? They have their entire cores locked up for a pretty long term. And the Celtics case, they are just stacked head to toe. You're not too worried about them. Luka's going to be able to keep the Mavericks in contention. He's always been a great playoff player. The Pacers, I feel like they've got a lot of room and money to play with. They need to see if they can re-sign Pascal Siakam, and they need to see if they can buff up that defense and see if they can get a little bit healthier. But I feel like they might have a easier path, especially in that Eastern Conference, to the conference finals yet again than the Minnesota Timberwolves, who, even if they are able to perform at this level again next season, not only does it get expensive, but you also then have tougher competition coming back. They're going to have the Nuggets again. The Spurs are coming up. The Mavs you're going to have to deal with. These teams that are the Thunder are still there. They're only going to get better. These are just some of the teams that made the playoffs this year. I think I kind of glossed over the Spurs there, but Victor Wembanyama down the stretch really was coming into his own and can lead that team to a run maybe even next season if they can get this offseason right. But this Wolves team has a lot of big questions to fill. Like Rudy Gobert, even though he won that fourth Defensive Player of the Year award, is it worth keeping him there for the long-term future, right? His contract, he signed a 4-year deal that ends. He has a player option after next season. And then he's an unrestricted free agent. I doubt that he's going to use that player option. I don't think some team is going to give him more than the $46 million that he's getting, but we're looking at it right now. That's going to be 30% of the cap. He's going to make 31% of the cap, and that's a lot of money to go into a guy that is an offensive liability on one end. No, he's great on defense, and he's a great regular season player. We saw in that series, he was kind of even a little bit of a liability on defense against the Mavericks, right? They kept throwing alley-oops over him, and I feel like that's kind of his whole job, to stop that. Lively and Gafford were able to make those back cuts once he made that step up, and honestly, the Timberwolves were not able to come around and defend that, which really sucks for a team that has built themselves around defense and around having the ability to have this elite defense overall. They need a little more on offense, and whether that's going out and getting some 3-point shooters, to fix that efficiency problem, which really was the reason they lost a lot of these games. Or the answer is, uh, keeping that team together. Like I said, Mike Conley is a big part of that. Maybe you can get a point guard, let him walk, get a point guard that can give you a little bit more on the offensive end, but they will lose some defensively if they let a guy like Mike Conley walk. This team is going to look a little bit different next season, and I'm just a little concerned that this might be, especially in a super competitive Western Conference, that this might be their pinnacle season. And I think that might be a little crazy to say with how young and inexperienced Anthony Edwards and the rest of this team is as far as playoff runs go. They'll learn from this mistake. They'll learn from the mistakes they made in this postseason, and postseason experience is an important thing, but Cat as your number 2, I don't think he can really be trusted in the playoff games with how inconsistent he is. And I think Cat's a great player. He has the ability to go for 60 on any night, but also he makes some boneheaded plays on the court. I've seen him make some of the stupidest decisions in these entire postseason, and he's not really at that age. I know Anthony Edwards made a couple of bad decisions, especially down the stretch in this series. But he's super young still, so he has a little bit of that excuse. Karl Anthony Towns has been in the league for quite some time and doesn't really get that benefit of the doubt anymore. He shouldn't be making some of these decisions that he is making. So he doesn't really strike me as a guy that can continue to be a number 2 option on a championship team, as good as he is. And he has the potential to be that. But if you're leaning on him every single night, you just can't depend on him to always show up and always be there for your team when you need him to be there the most. So I am a little concerned about the future of this Timberwolves team. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. They're going to be good. They're going to make the playoffs. They're not, depending on how much the salary goes up, they're not going to be in too much money trouble, but they're just not going to be able to add too many players because they're kind of skirting the line with going on into the second level of NBA contracts, the way that the cap works. But we'll see what happens, how much the cap goes up if they are in that second echelon. But we're going to move off of basketball here, move into the world of hockey. We've got a hockey game tonight, Game 5, the ever-important Game 5 in a 2-2 series between the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers, as well as breaking down the Game 5 that happened yesterday between the New York Rangers and the Florida Panthers. That saw the Florida Panthers take a 3-2 lead on the road in the Garden. So we'll take a look at both of those games, little preview of the weekend in the NHL. So stick around for that. We will be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about everything NBA involving the Timberwolves, the Mavericks, the Celtics, and the preview of the NBA Finals, which we did in segment 2. We broke down the game in segment 1, and we talked about the Timberwolves' future here in the last segment. Here in this fourth segment, we are moving away from the world of basketball and moving on to the world of hockey, the Stanley Cup Finals, the Stanley Cup semifinals. We're going to talk about both games. We're going to talk about the preview of Game 5 between the Oilers and the Stars, and we're going to talk about the review of the game between the Panthers and the Rangers that saw the Panthers take a 3-2 series lead in what was really a kind of crazy game. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you for sticking around and watching talking some sports with me on a beautiful Friday afternoon. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we are going to talk about hockey in this fourth segment of ours here today. We saw the Florida Panthers take a crucial Game 5. And Game 5 in any 7-game series, hockey, basketball, the winner of that wins 80% of the time. So these Game 5s are super important, at least mathematically, for who is going to advance to the Stanley Cup Final. The Panthers take Game 5 in this series. And really, they've been the better team. Just straight up, they've been the better team. The Rangers have been able to keep it close with behind goaltending, really. There was an empty net goal in this game. It's a 3-2 game overall. The Rangers, it was a 1-1 game. Rangers pull their goalie. Then they give up that empty net. It was a 2-1 game. They pull their goalie. Rangers give up that empty net goal. They are able to get it back within one with less than a minute to go, but they were unable to finish up that comeback. The Panthers, just like I said, they've been the better team. They've been able to control the 5-on-5s, and penalties have really, really been a killer for the for the Rangers. And they did score a shorthanded goal. It's something that they've done quite a bunch in this playoffs, kind of more than they should be, but that's because they've just been in the box way too often. Their penalty kill has been great, but it shouldn't have to be out there so often. It's been very physical. Every single series that they have played has been incredibly physical. Even the sweep over the Capitals, they were very physical, getting in the box. At some point, I mean, in this game, you take 4 penalties. It's just not okay. They keep losing the penalty battle, and that's why they keep losing these games. Igor Shesterkin, as much as he is standing on his head, he had 34 saves on 36 shots, 944 save percentage, which is crazy nowadays. You know, the average goalie is kind of sitting at around 900 save percentage. But Sergei Bobrovsky on the other end, that's really what this series was, a battle between goaltenders, and playoff Bob shows up in the playoffs. Big Bob, playoff Bob, he's done this now 2 years in a row where, you know, the Panthers, they made that incredible run to the finals last season, and now they are looking like they might be able to do it again. 2 years in a row. It's a lot of hockey, a lot of wear and tear on these guys, but it's really cool to see the ability to bounce back from a brutal loss in the finals last season and keep that momentum up and keep playing. It's not easy to do, especially in the sport of hockey, and a lot of that comes down to, you know, their physicality, especially the way they play. They're so physical. Their physicality is something that the Rangers are a team that can keep up with them, but the Rangers don't really seem like a good team. And I've said this before, and maybe I'm just not understanding it. But when I'm watching these games, when I'm watching the hockey games that are on in the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Rangers just don't look like a great team. They have a great goalie in Igor Shesterkin, and their defense is good, and they're a good team. Don't get me wrong. They're not a bad team. They're a good team. But nothing about them screams great. There's no great offensive weapon that I can look at and be like, oh, he's got the puck, you better be careful. There's no defense. There's no way the defense is playing that makes me think, oh my goodness, it's going to be tough to get a shot on these guys. You take a look at the shot numbers. They're giving up like almost two-thirds. They're giving up about twice as many shots as they are taking on shots on goal, at least. it's all been down to Sergei Bobrovsky, who is it's all been down to Igor Shesterkin, who has been wonderful in this playoff run. And you cannot have a successful playoff run without a goalie. You just can't. But I would like to see some more 5-on-5, and really the one thing I would like to see for the Rangers to win this, to come back and win this series, is just to stay out of the penalty box. I know the Panthers haven't been the greatest in this series at converting the opportunities they're getting, and a lot of that credit can go to the special teams of the New York Rangers. But you cannot keep going to the penalty box. You're putting too much pressure on your goal on Igor Shesterkin already, even on 5-on-5s. When you get into those 5-on-4 situations, it's kind of getting to a point where they're skating by. They're barely every game they've won has been in overtime. They haven't come out and dominated in any single game. The Panthers dominated in game 1. They dominated most of game 4. Now I know that game went to overtime as well, but they for a large chunk of that game were, especially second period on, they were pretty much in control. Game 5 here, again, the same story. It wasn't as dominant. It wasn't that uneven, but they were still just the better team on ice from what I was seeing. I need to see New York play with fire, and this is going to be their first elimination game that they're facing facing this postseason. So we'll see if they're able to react with their backs against the wall and force a Game 7 back at the Garden. It seems like both of these series are destined to go 7, especially with 3 of the 5 games in this series alone going to overtime. So that being said, I expect for the game on Saturday, the Rangers to take it. Just because I selfishly want Game 7, and I think this series deserves to go 7, or kind of has that feeling that it has to go 7. But it is in Florida. It is in Sunshine, Florida. So it's gonna be tough for them to pull it out. Game 6 elimination game, but backs against the wall. I think you get at least one. Take the series back to New York in the Garden, and we'll see what happens from there. The other Game 5 though, from this one coming up today between the Oilers and the Stars. Again, same premise. It's very, very important. Game 5s are hugely important in best of 7 series. Both of these series have been really close, and I think this game kind of comes down to the health of Chris Tanev. If he's playing tonight, which he's going to be a game time decision. I think the Stars can pull this out because he's been maybe the best defenseman in the entirety of the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, and going up against Connor McDavid, you need your best defenseman out there. If he isn't there, it's not to say that they can't win. Looking like they're optimistic he can play, but it will be a game time decision. I think that's what this is going to come down to. If he plays, I'm taking the Stars to take Game 5 at home. If he doesn't, there was a lot of momentum gained from the Oilers in their 5-2 win in Game 4. Again, that kind of felt like a backs-to-the-wall game for them, and they were able to respond very nicely, just like they've done in every single game, every single elimination game they've faced so far this postseason. They've been able to respond. And the Stars are, no stranger to falling behind or seemingly losing momentum. They were down 2-0 against the Vegas Golden Knights. They were down 1-0 against the Colorado Avalanche. So they've been able to battle back before. I think, like I said, I think this comes down to Chris Tanev. Reports are that they're optimistic he can play. That's the most recent report, so I'm going to take the Stars in a close one. But again, if he doesn't play, I think the Oilers are going to take it. So we'll have to see what happens in that game. Game 5 is tonight. Game 6 is on Sunday. We will break all of that down. Maybe even have a Stanley Cup Finals matchup for you on Monday. World of Hockey is the hockey playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs are coming down to the wire, and we'll keep you updated on everything going on there here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. But in our fifth and final segment here today, we are going to move on and talk about some baseball. We're going to do our bi-weekly power rankings. It has been just over 2 weeks. It's been 16 days since we did our last power rankings, which was on May 15th. It is now May 31st, so we will go over that coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the NHL playoffs, the Rangers falling to the Panthers 3-2 to fall to a 3-2 series hole in that ever important semifinal series. We talked about the implication of the Mavericks advancing to the NBA Finals, taking on the Celtics, where the Minnesota Timberwolves will go from here, and about the game from last night in our first three segments. We are going to finish off our show today, though, talking about the MLB. We haven't done power rankings in about 2 weeks, so we are going to do our updated Sports by GSMC Podcast Network power rankings. So that's coming up in just a second. But before we get to them, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and throw that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you for sticking around and talking some sports with me on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to do some MLB power rankings. And right here, we've got our MLB power rankings updated to today. Very simply, we'll start at the bottom, as we usually do. The bottom doesn't have too many changes. Overall, I switched the White Sox and the Marlins. The White Sox still have the worst record in baseball. The Marlins, while they are not good at all, have been slightly better. Injuries really have been that derailing factor for them, and being able to, get some of their guys back should make them a better team. I bumped them above the White Sox. I think they win a head-to-head, but it is close there at the bottom. No change, 28-26. Rockies, Angels, Athletics, all have been pretty bad. They've all been really bad. I think the Cardinals moving up, I have the Pirates here at 25. The Cardinals moving up is more of a factor in them moving down than it is anything else. Paul Skeens' arrival really has been an awakening for them. Having Paul Skeens come up is, in general, they probably should have moved up, but the rest of that team is still bad. They're great on Paul Skeens' day. It's must-watch television when he is pitching. Just the stuff that he's done through his first 4 starts in the MLB, throwing a no-hitter in one of them. He only went 6 innings, but six innings of no-hit baseball is insane. He's striking everybody out under the sun, and he's going to be an elite pitcher for a long time in the MLB. So that's very exciting for the Pirates. The Mets down at 24. They had a whole situation yesterday with Jorge Lopez. They made some more cuts today. Now, Jorge Lopez situation isn't the main reason why they fell. They've also just been awful in the last couple of weeks. You look at their last 10. They're 2-8 in their last 10 games, and that is, if for a team that was already struggling, they're now behind the Washington Nationals, who I have at 23, by 3.5 games in that division. They're probably going to be sellers at the deadline, so we'll see what happens with the New York Mets as time continues, if they can turn this around, because they do have some pieces that plenty of contenders would be very, very excited to get their hands on if they're up for sale in this offseason. But 23, we got the Nationals. They've been average. They're a bad team. 6-4 over their last 10. Their run differential for the season is just about as close to 0 as it can be. They're at -9, so not as close as not the closest in the league, but single digits. They've been kind of average. The emergence of some of their young guys keeps them in that upper echelon of bad teams, but they're still in that tier of bad teams. I talked about the Cardinals. They've been on a bit of a hot stretch. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They move up to 22 here in my rankings, up 3 spots. They're kind of in contention for that division. They've passed the Cubs, who, while they are they're 8-2. The Cardinals are. The Cubs, who I have falling 8 spots. They're actually the biggest fallers, they're the second biggest fallers. I didn't update the Reds. That's my fault. They stayed where they were. The Reds are exactly where they were last week. But the Cubs are the biggest fallers. They fall from 7 down to 15. I still believe in this team. They're a good team. They've fallen below 500, and that's because of this stretch. Actually, in the last 26 games, they have the same record as the Chicago White Sox, which is not something you want to have. You don't really want to connect yourself with the White Sox organization right now. The Reds at 21, like I said, they were there last week. Ignore the -10. It should be +0. I thought this Reds team would be really good, but there they are sitting last in their division. It's been a relatively solid division, surprisingly. No one in that division has been bad. They're a game and a half behind Pittsburgh. I do believe in the young talent of this team. I think that they can turn it on. Ellie De La Cruz has been a lot of fun to watch, and I think the young pitching will step it up soon. I think they're getting a little bit of bad luck, but I'm still a believer in this Reds team. A team I'm not a believer in is at number 20, and that's the Blue Jays. And I'm a big Blue Jays supporter. I like their team a little bit, but I am off the bandwagon. They just look lethargic, really, out there. They kind of look old, and I know they're not really that old, but they're most likely going to be sellers at the deadline. They probably should blow it up. Vlad Guerrero hasn't been the same in the last couple seasons since he almost won his MVP back in 2021. Bo Bichette has been great, but he's probably gone. The Blue Jays they took their swing and they missed, and unfortunately they're not gonna hit those same heights that they were at before. At number 19, I have the Detroit Tigers. The Tigers, who in a pretty solid AL Central, they are 500. They're trailing the Guardians, the Royals, and the Twins, who I all have in my top 10. So it's been a really solid division up there. Detroit at 500. It's really everyone is kind of close in that division besides the Chicago White Sox, who are down there with the worst record in all of baseball. But the Tigers, after that hot start, just kind of have been they've been really cooling off. They haven't been great. They've got some great pitching, but their batting hasn't. Their hitting hasn't quite been able to keep up with that level that they showed at the beginning of the season. At number 18, I've got the Diamondbacks, who have had a really disappointing season after making a run to the World Series last season. I still think they'll be able to turn it around, but their pitching has not been there, which is a little bit of a concern. The Astros at 17, they just continue to climb. Third in their division now, 5.5 games back of the lead. They're still under 500, but they're starting to go back to the Astros we know. They're within striking distance of that division lead now. Rays at 16 again. Kind of the same situation with the Blue Jays. They've lost that voodoo magic that they had. They're 3-7 in their last 10, and they just have not looked like the Rays team that we know that we know they are. We talked about the Cubs already. They're at 15. I've got the Red Sox at 14. They're just so average. Like, when they're good, they're 500. When they're bad, they're 500, and they're just so average. You got to put them right in the middle. So I've got them there at 14 on my list. Rangers at 13. They have been better. Still not great, but they're getting better. The bats are starting to wake up. The Giants, on the other hand, who I have at 12, are the biggest risers in my mock draft. They are 7-3 in their last 10. They've jumped to second. They're tied for second in that division with the Padres, who I have just one spot ahead of them at 11. They've figured it out. They were really struggling. It seemed like a lot of their additions weren't working out, but they've gone on a little run here, and they are back to where they kind of wanted to be at the beginning of this season. Padres, I have at 11. I just believe in their high-end talent a little bit more than the Giants. I don't really believe they're a great... They have the potential to be a great team. I just don't think they're there yet. Now we hit a couple of those AL Centrals. Top 10. I've got the Twins at 10 and the Royals at 9. I'm a big fan of this Royals team. I love the combination of Brady Singer and Cole Reagans at the top of that rotation. And Salvi Perez is having himself a nice little resurgent season after a little bit of a down slump last year. Bobby Witt is in MVP conversations. They did a great extending him before the season, before he really showed up to the national stage. The Mariners have just been solid all season. They're not making any kind of crazy push at 8. The Brewers have been surprisingly good, even with injuries to some of their top guys. They've been good. All of the Central divisions have. The Braves, they fall all the way down to 6. I think -1 is wrong. I'm pretty sure I had the Yankees at 5 before, but the Braves fall. I think they were at 3 before. Anyway. The Braves fall from 3 to 6, and that is because of the Acuna injury. 6 is still really good after having lost your 2 best players on your team. But finishing up the top 5, the Guardians, who have figured out how to hit again. J-Ram is there, and that bullpen is elite. The Orioles, who kind of have a super team. The Dodgers, who have a super team. The Orioles, who have Gunnar Henderson, who is another young MVP candidate, and they've got a lot of youngsters coming up from Norfolk. The Dodgers, just Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts. I don't think I need to say more. The Yankees at 2, their pitching staff, even without Garrett Cole, has been maybe the best in the entire league. And then you add Juan Soto to that lineup, and they have been awesome. And rounding it out at number 1, I have the Philadelphia Phillies. Bats are starting to show up, and that's the scary part. They have a +93 run differential. Nobody else in the entirety of the MLB, other than the Yankees, is even close. The Yankees have +97, but the Phillies and the Yankees both very similarly built. They both have some of the best rotations in the entire sport, and their bats, they have like 2 guys that are powering them. But anyway, those are my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But we are going to end our show today. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Appreciate all of you for sticking around and talking sports with me today. We'll be back on Monday, same time, same place. You all have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.